Why do I think we already talked about this? I know I've talked about this.
Probably when you did the kick around.
You're right. Because I'm sitting here thinking I'm repeating myself. I know we've done this bit already. Hello and welcome, FC Dallas Curious fan, to episode number 74 of Third Degree, the podcast. I am Buzz Carrick. Peter Welton is obviously not here today. He has some personal business to take care of, which happens from time to time. That means it's just myself, and my co-host today is none other than our usual legendary British influence, and that is Dan Crooke. Dan, how are you doing today, my friend?
Well, I'm feeling a bit special after that introduction. Now, surviving this no longer 2-game week.
Yeah, we've been shortened the week, and we've been shortened people on the podcast, perhaps appropriately. But we still had a game to talk about. It was just all the way back on Friday, and it's definitely worth, I think, getting into really quickly. We won't have to do 2 games. We still have to do 1, though. And that's the rivalry game, the El Capitan game, the Texas Derby game against Houston. And remind me, Dan, that I want to ask you about rivalries in Texas in a minute. When we're done with the game talk, I want to ask you about the bigger picture. But I think to start that game, we have to start with the elephant in the room, the elephant in the FC Dallas defense, and that is the legend of Matt Hedges, who passed Jason Kreis for the record number of regular season appearances for the club. He already owned the starts and minutes record. The man is a club legend. And all he did was, when he set the record, was go out and have a absolutely spectacular performance. And Dan, I know you're ready already to put up a statue for the man.
Yeah, I mean, I asked him that on the call after the game. Which side of the stadium did he want it? But Matt Hedges, humble as ever. But yeah, it was great to see him set the record. I mean, he's coming up his 10th. He's going to have his decade in Frisco next year, being a fantastic servant to the club, really, from 5 games into his career.
Yeah, he really quickly moved into the lineup way back when, partially perhaps from injuries, but really quickly people realized what an important key figure he was. And maybe he wasn't the full-time starter right away, but he definitely was a key contributor right away. And now, what is basically a decade later, he's breaking all kinds of records with the clubs. And you can imagine that at the age of, I believe, 29, I didn't look it up.
I think he just turned 30.
Did he just turn 30? Then, well, that's close enough to 29. Anyway, you can expect a couple of more seasons out of Matt, I would imagine. He may not be able to go until he's 34, 35 like Reto Ziegler is, but surely 32, 33, you would think. So a couple more seasons, he's going to set some pretty substantial marks. It'll take a homegrown who starts at 18 and plays for 15 years to beat him. I fully expect him to become, a member of the Texas Walk of Fame. If you remember, that's a thing around here. Not particularly active these days, but it should be a thing. He had, in this game in particular, he had 25 defensive actions, which is an amazing amount of work in the Houston game. More than Reto and more than a Brisson double.
I think he had them combined. He was under everything. Offensively, defensively, he had the only shot on target for the game. He was a bit unlucky. Towards the end, there was a header that he was barely out his reach and just kind of skimmed off him. If FC Dallas was going to get a result, it was going to be off the head of Matt Hedges on both sides of the field.
Yeah, and aside from Matt, the collective defense looked pretty good. This was the 3-man backline again, with Johnny Nelson playing as a left wing and Reggie Cannon as a right wing back, if you will. Johnny took a step forward in his passing and offensive production. Still is not Ryan Hollingshead, of course, but solid defensively. I did want to give him particular credit because he went up against Albert Ellis, who's a phenomenal player. That's a very, very difficult defensive assignment for a young player like Johnny Nelson. I thought he did a tremendous job.
Well, and Elise just destroyed SKC. Granted, they're not a particularly great team, but, for a guy who's, effectively a rookie since he was a... Sorry?
Well, Sporting was in first place that Houston just destroyed, yeah.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I guess I'm thinking too much back to the team that lost 6-0 in Frisco at the end of last season.
Yeah, you're just having memories of the Dallas dismantling last year. Yeah, no, this year Sporting is good.
Yeah, they did pretty well in Orlando. That was a weird tournament, though.
Well, I still have some minor concerns about pace in the back, but you're looking at a Dallas team that last time I looked it up a few days ago had only given up 3 goals against, which was the second best in the league. They're not going to have given up more, obviously, but things can change. They might even be alone in second place instead of tied at this point because other teams have played. So we feel good about the defensive situation, particularly because we've seen both Acosta and Santos, Thiago Santos, playing in a double pivot. That's plenty of reinforcement in front of them, whether it's a 4-man back line or 3-back line. So we're very happy with the defense, right? Offense, of course, we have a major problem, and one of the reasons I bring that up right now is because, Dan, you had a fantastic post this week that talked about exactly what the problem is, beyond just to say they're not scoring. That's easy to say. That's clear. So, Dan, why don't you explain for the audience what your story was you had this week and what the big issue is right now?
Well, thank you, first of all. There's been an issue of, we've seen that gap. Peter's called it an empty bucket a bunch of times. The double pivot we often see, taking the beginning of the season, those first couple of games with Tessman and Santos, when we say pivot, we're talking about, both pivoting back between midfield and defense, and the fact that one can pivot into the role and the other can support the forward runs. Well, you'd have Tessman going forward, Santos drops back. Santos goes forward, Tessman drops back. The last 3 games with Acosta in the role, really, it's just been a case of they've both sat back and supported the back 3 or 4. Now, with the back 3, you kind of expected it because, you want to have the numbers game and allow your wing-backs to get forward. But, as the team's gone back into, when they've played as that 4-2-3-1, 4-3-3 combination, you really didn't expect to see it. You expected to see FC Dallas hit them on the break, midfield up in. And we didn't get that. And speaking to Lucci in the week, he kind of said, they're taking it a step at a time. They wanted to get the defensive side of it down and feel confident. And confident was kind of an interesting word to hear come out of his mouth because, you're confident in your team always, right? But he said, now that we've got the defensive side down, keeping clean sheets, now it's time to take a step forward and start linking forward. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say before you keep going on your story is that quote for me at the time really struck me as something a coach says in the spring training part of a season.
Yeah.
That's what you would say after 2 or 3 games against, as you're getting warmed up for the season. Say, well, we got our defense now, so now look for the next 2 or 3 games. Now we're going to work on our offense as we get ready for the season. But this is happening for this club. This is happening now, or instead of maybe when it could have happened in Orlando if you had been playing in Orlando.
Yeah, definitely. Particularly when your first 3 games are against bottom of the Western Conference and 2 against a team that had never won in 3 of their franchise, as short as that is. It didn't seem like the time to be working on defense. It seemed like these are points for taking, let's go and get them. But instead it was confidence in getting points, as in just getting a point, trying to get a 0-0 out of the gates. Again, probably not the time to use it to kind of have that mentality, but they're on their 3rd preseason, some of them on their 4th. It's kind of a weird time for everyone. I did like speaking to both Matt Hedges and Reto Ziegler at different times, they kind of put it down to the midfield just isn't playing fast enough. That as play transitions, they're just getting left behind.
I can see that. I actually have a little bit of a theory about that. It's related to the season a bit, and we'll come back to specifically who we think personnel wise is an issue. But that playing slowness for me, my concern is that it comes from a little bit of a mentality focus, maybe even burnout. And I know that's crazy when you're talking about a team that's played 5 games, but think about what's happened to this team mentally since last season, right? They press in the playoffs and almost knock off Seattle, right? Then you have personnel moves start to happen. There's a few changes, but nothing crazy. You get Thiago Santos in. That's not significantly different. Grezzo had already been gone for a while. You get these stories, however, that Franco Jara's coming in. So now we're worried about that a little bit. So you get ready for this season. Then you have the big COVID gigantic hit. Now, granted, that affects every team, of course, but this team, was one of many that had their season shut down right after they get going. And then they go through another spring training, and it's time to go to Orlando, and then bam, they get hit by this COVID infestation that they can't really take any point. There's no pointing fingers at any individual's fault in this. It just sort of happens systemically. And so they're out again, and then they have to go back and do another preseason to get ready. And along the way, a player who's relatively liked within the team gets jettisoned for off-field issues. That's Jesse Gonzalez. You have guys coming in and the well-liked, very popular guys like Cobra are all of a sudden not playing. You got guys like Reggie Cannon who are looking at making their big move, and maybe it's not going as fast as he would like. And other guys are thinking, man, he's getting out of here. When am I going? And some of the young guys are looking at players that are being reported as coming in and might be taking their playing time. So I think there's something to be said for the fact that maybe there's just a little bit of flatness or dare I say burnout mentally that this deep into the year, not season, the year, that they're not mentally sharp and mentally aggressive. They're too much just playing in the game. And I even asked Lucci about that a little bit on the conference call, if you remember, and he agreed somewhat that there's been a lot of mental wear on this team, but he likes the response he's seeing. So with some time, maybe we'll see how it goes, but there's definitely, I think, not just a physical side of this, but a mental side.
Yeah, definitely. You got to think about the things we've been through. Soccer is a very stop-start game just in its nature. One of the comparisons is like to long-distance runners. People who, maybe run half marathons and marathons for fun, and they start picking up soccer and they're like, well, I just can't deal with this whole sprint 10 yards and stop and then sprint 10 yards and stop. It's just it's just not conducive to my body. So just in nature, you've got guys who are used to having a 10-month period where they're trained day in, day out, play day in, day out, and then they stop for a couple of months instead. It's been, especially the guys who go to the national team, it was October, it all stops, or whenever they hit their MLSPA date, stop for November. Guys going to national team camp start back up in December, sort of on the side, and then they go off in January. They have their camp, come straight into take a couple of weeks off, go into preseason, have a couple of weeks of the preseason, then it all stops for a couple of months. Builds back up, go off to Orlando, stop again for a couple of weeks, build back up. It's just, and particularly the whole thing of everyone sitting in their hotel rooms for 2 weeks, some without even access to fresh air. It's,
right.
That's damaging in every sense.
Yeah. I remember the reaction when they got to go outside for the first time. Yeah. Yeah. So I wonder about the mental side. But so mental aside, nice joke. Do you think there's a specific player in midfield or in the front six, perhaps, that might be particularly somebody we should look at in order to try and fix these problems? Or is it something that can be happened just tactically, just with development?
Well, I think a lot of people outside of the club have identified Brian Acosta as maybe not doing what we expect of Brian Acosta. That's the big change to the midfield. That's one of your biggest ever signings, and it's somebody who's just not producing. Not completing very many passes. He's got the famous air shot, and when you're playing a double pivot with a guy like Thiago Santos, who was brought in to be really a single pivot, you expect Acosta, who's a typical 8, to be the one getting forward more and linking up play, but he's just not doing it.
Yeah, I wonder about why we're seeing a double pivot. I mean, I knew why we were when Tessman was in there, because Lucci talked about Thiago Santos being new to the system and maybe not knowing the roles completely. But now, like 5 months later, that ought to not be the case. So I feel like tactically we should be able to see Santos as a single pivot. And that would, of course, free Acosta up, because I would agree that Acosta is the one who's not doing the linking job. Now, you could say Thiago Santos isn't either, but he's not supposed to be, I don't think. I think Acosta's supposed to be.
He's
the guy with
still been one of the best attacking players on this team in every game.
I would agree with that, but I think we saw how much the team changed when Brandon Svenja came in, and it had a lot to do with his positioning. It's like Brandon only had like 10 touches that game, and it still changed the way the game was. So if Acosta can be shifted up higher by about 10 yards up the field, I think that'll make a big difference in terms of the quadrants where Dallas has possession.
Well, especially I think Brandon's biggest impact was actually off the ball. He makes those runs. He takes a marker with him that eases the load on the team as a whole. It kind of kills at least part of the high press. And I did ask why why they were persisting with a double pivot, and Lucci. That was when Lucci started talking about taking it one step at a time, and he was talking about a lot about being sound defensively and working on ball recovery. Not a whole lot of, building a foundation, which building a foundation when you've got one of the best defenses in the league is kind of a strange sort of line to come out with. But, building, as I said, building a foundation before kind of getting further up the field in transition. I was a little concerned because at some point the idea of a 666 was used, was mentioned. I was like, no, please, no.
Well, that comes from that Warshaw idea that Dallas has multiple midfielders who can do a rotational game. But, Paxton is willing to do that work, but you don't want your higher free player, particularly when you're playing a double. That guy needs to be really free up in front, playing almost as a real 10,
Yeah, I was hoping that was kind of what the intention was, rather than like a straight flat 3-6s, because that would be the most boring team to watch.
Yeah, that would be bad. Well, a lot of what we talk about with that positioning is, and again, to use the Brandon Svenja example, as you would see when the transition would happen in that game, but by his being like 10 yards further up the field, he takes one step and he's able to turn that ball back into the center backs rather than letting them break loose up the field. And that little change, too, can make a lot of difference in terms of the other team's ability to not get out of the back easily. And that's part of how you keep a high press going and how you let the other team not transition quickly down the field, which was the case with what they were playing against the last two games, which was a team that liked to play with very rapid transition in both Nashville and in Houston.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of one of the beauties of the way that that they have the midfield set up in a double pivot or in a single or even in that triple pivot, is just being aggressive, having that kind of pressing nature to put players under pressure. And it's been a little bit disappointing to see, when we talked about even switching to the 3-5-2, the idea being that you've got three centre-backs, one can be spare and attack the ball, or further up the field that can support one of the centre midfielders while the other one attacks the ball. And that was just not what we saw. We saw a very conservative approach.
All right, here's my last question about the Houston game. How are we feeling about Franco Jara?
So it's going to factor into the stuff I was writing about, the midfield not playing too deeply. We saw some really nice touches from him, really cultured. There was a couple where where the easy thing to do was kind of take the ball down into a defender, and instead he kind of played body side and took it round. But we saw him drop in deep a lot. We saw him trying to make runs up the left wing. We saw him in positions that you don't want your high nine. When I looked at, it wasn't for the Houston game, but when I looked at numbers from the beginning of the season to the end of to now, I was looking at the touches by the 9, the 10, and whoever replaced them in the lineup, specifically in that position. And in the final third, they're getting about half as many touches as they were the first 2 games. Now, law of averages, if you're getting half as many touches, you're going to score half as many goals at best.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment. It looks to me like Hara is looking for more touches. Now, we've talked about how he and Cobra both are not getting enough touches. Mikey Barrios is not getting enough touches. So I see a player in Hara, and I do have concerns, but they're related to how he's integrating into the team. I mean, is he a touch slow? Yes, but he's 32, so that's to be expected. As you mentioned, the culture is there. He clearly knows how to play. The ball's not coming to him, so he's coming back to midfield and looking for it, trying to find it. He's pushing out wide, trying to find it. And so you're getting him, the limited touches he has are in the wrong place. So, I don't think I'm not judging Hara in a negative way here. I'm judging the system not supporting him yet, just as it didn't support Cobra in the game he played the other day. It's whoever's in that 9 role is not getting the ball in quality positions, and that's on the rest of the midfield in order to make it happen. So my concerns about Hara and his production are related to team concept and not individual concept. Now, Lucci is going to have a tough line to walk if the team continues to not produce. How long you keep running out players that aren't producing, even with one of them being your highest paid $1 million player, people are going to start. I don't mean people like on the outside. I mean people on the inside. Like his own players are going to start to look at each other funny and be like, why are we rolling out the same 11 dudes when we haven't scored in 6 games? Not that we're there yet, but there is a line to walk there with the coach. If players are outperforming in training, and players know it, what I mean? The team knows it. Those guys aren't dumb, So if he continues to be making decisions based on something other than performance, that's how you lose a locker room. So that'll be a thing to watch. I don't think we're there yet, but I think it's a thing to be aware of as we move forward.
Well, you say you mentioned it as an internal thought, but even external, we've seen people completely write off Hara now and demand to know why Cobra's not getting time. And then when Pepe comes in, demanding to know why Pepe's coming in instead of Cobra. And, pretty simply, Hara and Cobra are not runners. They're not guys that you want getting the ball deep and trying to run through the opposition. They're guys that you want to get into the box and feed them the ball, get them into at least the final third and let them do something. The old adage about the First World War and walking very slowly out of the trenches into machine gun fire and how doing the same thing again over and over again with the same results is the definition of insanity. It applies there. If you bring on Cobra because Hara is struggling because he's too slow to drop that deep and run through the team, you're going to get the same result with Cobra. Unfortunately, Pepe isn't the answer there. Ferreira isn't the answer there. It's the midfield. It's let's get the ball higher. It's play Lucci ball, not play this conservative brand of it.
Yeah, there's an aggressiveness missing, I think, from most of the team. And we see that expressed when you do bring in the young kids by how it changes, how it sparks. Whether it's Paxton, whether it's Brandon, the 2 examples we can think of, that the thing is sparked, the thing is popped, and all of a sudden there's movement, and it's like, why is he the only guy doing this? So there's some mentality there that I think needs to be addressed one way or the other. All right, that's the last thing about the Houston game, except that I want to talk about one big picture item, Dan. Now, you're a little bit more in the supporters culture than I am, so I want to ask you this question. What should we do? The universal we, what should we do with the rivalry cup, the El Capitan, in the state of Texas when Austin FC comes in? Does Austin FC become part of El Capitan? Does Austin need its own thing with each Dallas team and a Houston team? Or is there a way to do a triple thing? What do you think the answer is?
Well, ultimately, that is a trophy that was brought by the front offices, so they're going to do whatever they want to do.
Right.
But no, Austin isn't a rival of either team. Rivalries are historic. They're not, just made. Houston Dynamo and FC Dallas fans are rivals because of Ricardo Clark kicking
right. Yeah, fish in the
head, and stuff like that. Not because somebody just says, here's another team, just hate them, I guess.
Yeah. Well, fair enough. I guess we'll have to see what happens organically. That's the way we always think of soccer.
I mean, Austin definitely are trying to make noise and agitate people. Last year when Columbus were here, a lot of fans from Austin made the drive because they wanted to quote unquote kick the tires on their new players.
Hashtag marketing.
That's got nothing to do with marketing.
Well, not that part. The Austin making a noise part, though.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just they're gonna have to find their own rivalries, I guess. And if people want to care about them, they'll care about them. If not, they won't. Realistically, half of their fan base are going to be made up of people who just can't be bothered to drive to Dallas or Houston anymore. So, not going to be a lot of passion in that one.
Well, they do have the 40,000 ticket thing going, which is impressive and good for them. And I actually welcome another team in Texas. I don't necessarily love the way it came about, but I love the fact that there's a third team here. I think that's tremendous. I do feel bad, as I always say I do, for San Antonio. I think they deserved it, but that's a different discussion. Just having a third team in general, I'm on board and I'm excited.
Oh no, I'm with you. It definitely should have been San Antonio, but having a third team is great anyway you put it. And Austin has a great women's soccer scene. It has a great youth soccer scene. Maybe it can be an MLS hub still.
All right, on to the next game on the Dallas schedule, and that was Wednesday's Colorado game. Now, we on Third Degree are the non-politics version of these things. We're going to talk about it only from a logistics standpoint. And the logistics standpoint that I wanted to bring up, Dan, was the what, in my opinion, is poor communication by the club. Because I listened to Lucci today, and Lucci said something about hearing about it when he hit the locker room. Which is what, 2 hours before the game, probably?
Yeah.
Yeah. So at least someone on the staff at that point at time knew something potentially was happening. Now, we didn't see any lineups posted about an hour out as usual. And I know there was some communication through official channels to just watch the broadcast. To me, that is all a gigantic fumble in terms of communication with your fan base. Most of the people that are coming to the game can't listen to that broadcast. There was no good official communication from the team to the fan base far enough out to make a change in plans. 30 minutes, an hour, even if it's a warning. I mean, I get maybe you don't want to scare off fans or something, but to me, this is all a gigantic fumble in communications with your fan base.
I'd say that it kind of goes back to the last home game, right? FC Dallas having that weather updates page and not updating it for 3 hours.
Right.
It's basic communication, both to media and fans, even to their own staff. I mean, the problem you have is, there was obviously talk before I even left my house. I was waiting to see what happened because there was a lot of talk about MLS maybe postponing everything, or players maybe postponing everything. Sorry, but a lot's going to hinge on.
We discussed it among ourselves at starting at 4:00 when the first Milwaukee thing, the Bucks thing happened.
Yeah, and there was a lot of talk about the Players Association and BPC were trying to make it happen, but communication getting through was kind of difficult, and a lot hinged on the Nashville-Orlando game. So I waited until that game kicked off before I even left. Obviously, as we found out since, there is an MLS rule where players have to turn off their phones an hour before the game. So communication just didn't get through to them. The Nashville coach, Gary Smith, had said he didn't know any games had been called off until after their game because there's just, in that instance, and particularly without a crowd or anything, there was just no communication with the outside world for those couple hours. Listening to Lucci today on the fan, he was talking about, as well as just hearing chatter about it, the meetings they were having as a team, coaching staff, with ownership, with Colorado's technical staff, with the officials, communicating back to the league. The Athletic put something up saying that by the end of it, so many sets of players were going to effectively strike for it, that Don Garber held a quick conference call with all the owners for the teams that would participate in yesterday and said, hey, look, we just need to call it en masse and get behind them now. Sorry, Deloy Hansen.
Let's not get into that.
I'm not getting into anything. But by the time it all went down, in the press box, we were watching the ESPN broadcast for the Miami game against Atlanta, and it was the same as it was in Frisco. It was players were kind of standing around a few minutes before they were due to kick off, and there at least they got the message across that the game was likely to be postponed. I think FC Dallas screwed the pooch on that part because I got there, the training balls weren't out. Goalkeepers had done their initial warm-up, but all the players had come back in. The officials were kind of going through their warm-up still.
Yeah, that was the biggest indicator, was that there was no players out, 30 minutes, 45 minutes
and then,
for the game.
Like you say, the lineups come out an hour before kickoff, but nothing was released until half an hour before the game. MLS didn't even have it. The only place that had it was Foot Mob.
Yeah. Well, they must have gotten the data from somewhere.
Oh, they would have gotten it from Opta.
Yeah.
So it just meant, officially it had been filed, but they weren't planning on publishing it. I'm sorry. And we're asking for updates, and we're saying, and they're saying, well, Gina, the VP of Communications, is doing TV, and all we can really do is wait for the updates that come through on the TV. So fans never found out until after it was postponed. People watching at home found out at the exact same time most of the FC Dallas fans found out. It was, it was kind of like what you'd want to see for the weather delay. Things are delayed at present.
Yeah.
Update, we have no update. Just something.
Well, even the final announcement inside the stadium was maybe 5 minutes after the announcement had been made on social media. People around me had no idea that it was canceled, for 5 or more minutes. Now, speaking, Dan, of the lineup that got confirmed, it was, as we predicted around these parts, imagine that. And that was going to be returned to the 4-man back line in a 4-2-3-1. Now, I thought it'd be fun to talk a little bit about what that lineup was going to be and see what we thought. Now, in particular, Ryan was back at left back. That's fine. Brian Acosta was keeping his spot as the linking midfielder. It was still a double pivot, but what we're calling linking because that's what he's supposed to be. The real interesting thing was up front, where I thought Fafa Pico appropriately was going to be your left wing starter. Franco Jara was, of course, going to keep the 9 spot, as we expected for now. And the real interesting parts were Jesus Ferreira back at the 10 and Ricardo Pepi, as you mentioned, a player more likely to run at people on the right wing. So what did you think of some of those changes?
Interesting. I know Lucci's talked about the idea of Pepi on the wing, which is weird because he doesn't like the idea of Ferreira on the wing when neither are particularly fast, but they're both guys who are good running with the ball. It would have been interesting to see how it panned out if in that moment Pepi was going to be, kind of a true winger or more of an inside forward, getting him with Jara, and then
right.
Seeing how Fafa and Jesus kind of played around that.
It would have been interesting to see if it turned more into a box, what we might call a 2-2-2 setup. Pepi, not particularly a natural winger. If you want to tap a natural winger, you would have had to go to Brian Reynolds maybe, or even Orion Hollingshead, the guy that complaining, where those would have been more natural wingers. But the reason that you and I predicted Pepi would start was that how much Lucci glowed about him on the conference call, the media call earlier in the week. So we had an inkling something was happening with that, which is why I expected him to play at least. And we certainly know that what Lucci said about him was that he was training well. Now, right now, we can't verify that. We only can take Lucci's word at it. So it seems that he earned some playing time based on his performance in training.
Well, especially when you think, Lucci is not one that likes to talk about individuals too much. In a positive or negative sense, he likes to talk about the team. So to take a good few minutes, discussing how well Pepi was doing was very
telling.
It was huge. Yeah. It was telling.
Now, it does bring me to a point I made on one of my Patreon's little bits this week, Dan, and I want to get your thought on this. I have 2 thoughts about Lucci and his tinkering, I'm going to call it. The first is Lucci will make changes later in the week than any coach I've seen come through here. Now, Colin Clark, by Monday or Tuesday, you could easily see the guys that were going to be a starter by the weekend. Oscar Pereira, usually by Wednesday, he's still experimenting. He's still rotating guys in. Thursday, maybe a little, but usually by Friday for the walkthrough, it's pretty locked down. But Lucci, I've actually witnessed Friday walkthroughs and heard about Friday walkthroughs that then Saturday rolls around and it changes. So he's willing to make tweaks later in the week than anyone else. And all coaches will tell you that it's always a game day decision about lineups. But, there's a school of thought that you work in the lineup you think you're going to play in, like during the week. And then the other side of this coin is that the amount of tactical changes we've seen this year. We've seen a 3-man back line as a 3-5-2. We've seen it as a 3-4-3. We've seen the base 4-3-3, which is the single pivot, the natural Lucci ball shape. And now we've seen a lot of, at home in particular, 4-2-3-1. So we've seen him searching for ideas. So what do you think? Is he over tinkering with the lineup? And does either one of those things, too many different tactics or late changes, do either one of those things bother you?
A little. Consistency is a good thing. Doesn't have to be the same 11, same formation every week, but having some consistency is always a hallmark of successful teams. I actually asked him that after the Houston game. If maybe running 3 formations in three games was, I tried to put it nicely and say, an overload of information for the players, just in what their roles would be. But he was pretty adamant that no, it's it's all basic stuff, and players know their roles, and that there's a rough game plan, and really talking about the fundamentals of the game of playing defensively, finding space, attack on the attacking side, and that it's a big advantage to have that fluidity and know that if they're in a pinch, there is plan C, plan D, plan E, and so on and so forth.
One thing I will give Lucci credit about is he does talk a lot about flexible tactics, about fluid shapes, and about coverages. And he is correct about that in the sense of, like, think about the way this team would build out when they're in the 4-man back line, right? The wings, the outside backs step up and the center backs split, and you would see a 6 drop in. And so right in that moment, it looks just like a 3-5-2, right? Mm-hmm. And the same, so that those kind of overloads, he wants the modern outside backs coming up, right? There's always going to be 2 or 3, either a double pivot or a single pivot, but it's almost always a 3-man triangle. And the front is almost always another 3-man triangle. Usually it's a 9 with 2 wings, but every once in a while in the 3-5-2, it rotates and it's a 10 with 2 strikers. So again, there's these rotations and these coverages. When they're high pressing, the coverages are the same. And when they're building out, the coverages are the same. And when it collapses into the same sort of shape, So a lot of times I get what he's talking about. But I too worry that maybe it's a little too much. And I think it is a sign that early in this season, he's trying to find some answers. So
yeah, I think, in talking about maybe like too much fiddling, you're looking at guys like Johnny Nelson, who already he's not an attacking wing back. He's very much a defensive fullback. But by going between the back 3 and the back 4, you're changing his points of when to get forward and when to get back, how much cover he has from the midfield, how much cover he has from the defense, how much the attacking midfielder is going to cover back. And it's those small instructions within a role that then become a bit clouded, and that's where you see maybe, although he was excellent in the Houston game, that's maybe when you see, I don't need to track back with that guy because the centre-back's going to pick him up, and then suddenly the centre-back doesn't. And we've seen that a few times between Reto and Ryan early last season when Ryan was still kind of really getting into the swing of things.
Yeah, that definitely was the disconnect with Nelson. Now, earlier I gave good compliments to him because I think he did really well. Mm-hmm. Against Houston, he did have the one turnover that almost was the goal. But most of the time he also was really good about turning Ellis into the defense, turning him in towards the midfielder or turning him to the center back, where the help defense was. So he did a nice job, all things considered. Now he's not Ryan. I mean, who is at this point, right? Ryan's one of arguably the best left back in the league last year, and maybe he's not quite on form yet this year, but there's no reason why we didn't expect him to be right back in there. The way he plays is such a pivotal part of the way the team plays, and part of the missing offense almost assuredly has been him missing.
Yeah, and early this season we have to consider he also had that knee injury. The Montreal game, was it the Montreal game? He really shouldn't have played. Lucci broke his Wednesday training rule to kind of squeeze him in on that one.
Yeah, well, that's okay with Ryan. I understand he's such a pivotal piece of what you're doing. Even more than Reggie, I think Ryan's outside in play, fill underneath, almost like an extra midfielder and a defender at the same time. It's such a pivotal part of what they're doing.
Well, especially when, we know the strength of the team really has been the right side of, Reggie, and then getting the ball to Michael Barrios has been this team's most important player for 5 years.
Yeah.
We know that that's where the team's true strength lies. So having someone who can reliably get forward and then track back on the left side has been huge.
How about Jesus at the 10? Were you ready for that to happen again?
I'm trying to remember the first time I said I didn't like it because it's not changed.
Yeah, I'm not. Lucci talks a lot about line breaking, and we know how important that position is in terms of building forward, the connectivity that needs to happen particularly with Acosta, and the outside guys coming forward, I'm not sure Jesus is doing that this year. I thought the first 2 games earlier in the year, he was particularly not very good.
Yeah, it's kind of a strange one. I mean, we talk about the line breaking, and we've talked a bunch of times about how he and Paxton differ in that position, about how Paxton's going to pass through a team and create opportunities, and with Jesus, you're waiting for him to make a run through for someone else to create the opportunity for him, or to create the opening that he can then create an opportunity, in closer. I mean, if you're not getting up the field, then you can't really risk having to take those extra few steps. It's you need someone who can penetrate with the ball, not penetrate without to receive the ball. Yeah,
he was at his best last year when he was making those runs at the gaps in the back four, with and without the ball much. All right, so speaking of Saturday, at this time we expect the game to be on. I'm not seeing signs from social medias or whatever that the players are already planning on not playing. The team seems to think they're playing. Lucci says they think they're playing, so we're expecting this Minnesota game to happen. Now, the North Texas game, the road game at Ford Madison, has been canceled, but again, that's in Wisconsin, so that's maybe more reasonable to expect that one to have been canceled. So,
well, plus they're playing in Milwaukee this season, so it's doubly,
Fair point, yeah. So that's not a surprise that one got, and it being down here, it's a significant difference that Minnesota's coming down here to play. So we're expecting the game. We could be wrong. We'll find out just like everybody else, and if we learn something, we will, of course, report it. But what do you think we're going to see against Minnesota? There was in a sense a tiny bit of goodness gracious. Rotation. In a sense, there was a tiny bit of rotation happening, and in the sense that Mikey was going to get a game off, obviously. But I would assume now that he doesn't need a game off. So expect him back. Yeah.
Lucci mentioned in his pre-game stuff, and we don't maybe have the insight for the game because his pre-game media, which is normally 2 days beforehand, which would have been earlier today, but I guess maybe because of his radio commitment at the same time, they moved it to tomorrow. But before the Colorado game, he was talking about there would be rotation for Colorado or Minnesota. So there's obviously less need for that now they've actually had a rest. So it'll be interesting to see if Michael Barrios is back. He's not performed well. If he was benched on the basis of performance, then maybe we won't see him back. If it was a case of he feels he's exhausted, then maybe we will. Yeah, the big questions at this point will be Mikey back in rotation. I think Fafa Pico will hold his left wing spot that he was going to get.
Paxton Palmacal obviously is the elephant in the room. I love that expression.
Twice today.
Yeah, twice in one day. I mean, is he going to be able to play? Is he going to be able to start? We don't know. We can't watch training, so we can't give you our judgment on how fit we think he is. When he comes in, he looks truly dynamic and truly game-changing. Everyone is desperate for that kid to be able to start, yet Lucci seems adamantly protecting him above all costs, even in the case of losing games almost, to not risk him. I'm baffled by that. We assume Acosta will stay in the midfield, and we assume that Ryan will be back in the outside back. And then, of course, Reggie's any minute now. So that's kind of what we expect to have happen, and we'll hear more from Coach tomorrow, obviously.
Yeah, and interesting you mentioned Reggie. It was pointed out in a few places, Reggie was one of the few FC Dallas players who didn't get changed into their game shorts and socks. He was still in street clothes. So, that may have just been a case of he went in and he was like, no, we're absolutely not playing. I'm not getting changed. But some people definitely took it as a sign of, that means he's gone. So what did you make of it?
Well, I noticed that all the players in the tunnel waited for him. And he came out. He was one of the last ones to join them in jeans. And it looked like he was almost like, wiping his hair off like he just gotten out of the post-game shower. That's how I took it, that he went ahead and showered and other guys hadn't. I will tell you that an update from my end is that I've heard of a German team that's come in at the last minute for him, which now is 4 teams that I know of that are trying to get him. Interestingly, not spotted by me, but spotted by somebody else. He has followed Boa Vista, which is a Portuguese team, on Instagram. It's one of 3 teams he follows, including FC Dallas and Barcelona. So read into that what you will. I'm not saying anything.
It's because they have that beautiful stadium built into a cliffside.
Yeah, well, I have before mentioned that there is a Portuguese team among the mix. So you may draw from that what you will. I think it's kind of interesting. But what I can tell you from what I hear about Reggie is that this thing is, I thought it was at the finish line with one of the teams. And then since then, 3 more teams have come in. So it's like it got complicated really fast. My worry is that Dan Hunt is now trying to squeeze every last dime out of some of these teams, where you risk alienating those teams and having them say, screw you guys, and bail. And you risk leaving Reggie high and dry with only one option maybe that he doesn't want, perhaps like the Russia one. I would suggest don't do that one. You're risking wrecking this thing to squeeze a couple of bucks out of a kid that you should be taking care of, right? That you've promised to take care of and facilitate and assist pathway to Europe, right? That's the whole thing. So do not screw this up. So I'm literally saying the same thing I've been saying for a week and a half, is that some of these things reached a stage where I honestly thought any minute we're going to hear about Reggie catching a flight to Europe. And I still feel that way. Like the Portuguese league, for example, I believe starts this weekend. So I think at any minute it'll be Reggie's last game, and any minute he'll be gone. And yet he'll play right up to the point at which he's not an FC Dallas player. So he'll be the starter at right back until he's gone. And then all my information is that Brian Reynolds will be the starter at right back, or get the first chance at right back. So we'll see.
I think, one thing you can always say about Reggie, he's such a competitor and, such a straight up person that, you mentioned he'll play until he goes. He'll give 100%. He's not going to be one of those guys that, well, maybe we'll find his limit. I don't know, because every player does have one. He's going to be that guy that gives 100%, and, he's not going to be worried about the idea of, well, I don't want to get injured and ruin my chances of a transfer. He's just going to want to get in and win.
Yeah, I would say that about Reggie, that he totally understands the way the system works. I imagine he's getting frustrated with the lack of finality to it. But I agree with you that he will be, as dialed in and as present. And I even asked Lucci about this. Well, man, it was like a month ago, maybe now. How is Reggie's mindset? And he said, "Oh, fantastic! It's focused 100% right here with us in training where it needs to be." And he gave Reggie a lot of love and credit for that. And I think Reggie is true to that and will be true to that right up till the minute that he is gone, in which case he will, quickly go on about his business. And of course, always have a love for his club, just like I'm sure people like Kellen Acosta do, even though they don't play here anymore. And Victor Ulloa as well. So, and Oscar Pereira too, for that matter, even though he's not here anymore. But so that's the update when Reggie is what I can tell you is another team, a German team has come in, but that's, I really do hope that Dan Hunt isn't screwing this up. I'm not privy enough to know whether he is or not, but when you hear this much action at the last second like this, it makes me really nervous.
It sounds a lot like a bidding war, and you got to think Andres is not going to be the one pushing a bidding war.
You wouldn't think so, because they've set this up. They put so much into making sure this happens, with the way they set up the contract, the way they want to use this as an example to the academy of this is how it'll work. You come here and you do great for us. We will help you. It's going to help the club with the money coming in. It's going to help the club with the repetition of they're going to be a selling team. It needs to happen. Hopefully they don't bone it.
Also, you got to remember, like, the business in soccer is all about relationships. Bruno Fernandes said in an interview just the other day, it was based on talking to Cristiano Ronaldo about what the people at Man United are like was the reason he went there. Not the money, not the prestige, but it was like that was yes, I'm happy to go and live my life and be there every day. But there's things like that, and players talk. What am I going to be forced to stay against my wishes? Yes, no. What's what are the relations like with the ownership, the coaches, the fans, and teams too? Teams don't. It's not just all about we want this player for this much money, because there's a lot of take Reggie. There's a lot of right backs in the world that you can get for a few million of a similar talent level. They want an easy process, an amicable process in dealings with a club both ways. So it's all about those partnerships, and we've heard about partnerships in the past that FC Dallas have screwed up with clubs where there's not going to be that same movement anymore, and particularly in leagues like in Italy, in France, Germany, Portugal. You want to harvest relationships. You don't just want to be Bayern Munich's feeder club. You want to be a friendly team that can provide that pathway and have the contacts to do so.
Yeah, and you want to have a good reputation as, not giving away players, but you want to have a good reputation as being somebody that's willing to do business. And when you do business with them, they don't overcomplicate things. They don't make things difficult for you, because nobody wants that. Nobody wants to work with somebody who's a pain in the ass. So it's all part of the growing pains of this club as it's dipping its toe into these international markets. This is all so relatively new for this club, and I just hope that they can see their way to make it. I mean, Andre Zanata, coming from Gremio and his experience there, he should know these waters, you would think. So hopefully he can keep Dan in check. And just this much activity scares me. That's what my concern more for Reggie than anything else is. I don't want to see Reggie get stuck when he's been after this move for like a year and a half now.
And I think it's kind of the Cowboys conundrum, right? You don't see Mark Cuban getting involved in Donnie Nelson's business, but you see Jerry Jones getting involved in Will McLean's business.
Yeah. So
we hope that the good friends of the Joneses, the Hunts, aren't meddling too much.
You hope not. All right, Dan, what have we left out, or what are we missing that we need to talk about today?
Oh, I don't even know. I guess one cool thing is our good friend and local prospect / former FC Dallas Academy player Weston McKennie has touched down in Turin ahead of his loan to buy to Juventus.
That is an excellent point, and that reminds me that somebody asked me today, is Weston McKennie now the biggest and best ever prospect produced by this academy? And I think he's not there yet. I'm still going to go with the Funes Mori brothers, since there was two of them, and they're also much, much deeper into their careers. Obviously, Weston has the potential to be there, and I think he could be there within a couple of years. But it's super exciting to see a local kid, a kid that came out of the academy that we all saw playing here, do great things and make a move like that to one of the big, big, awesome, amazing, huge, massive clubs in the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of difficult when you talk about the Funes Moris because, obviously making appearances for Argentina, not the easiest thing to come by.
No.
At the same time, they've been kind of so-so, one playing in Mexico, one going to Spain and having a little bit of time at Everton and not setting the world alight, but being a consistent player in those top divisions. And for Weston McKennie to definitely be that biggest prospect without a doubt would have taken a couple more years at Schalke and impressing at Schalke more for a longer time, and or now fighting his way into what is a very complicated midfield in Turin.
How much he plays will be a big, interesting question, a thing to watch, and will determine a lot about what the trajectory of his career is, whether he can get into that team or not.
It's that MLS connection, right? McKennie and Pirlo.
Yeah. Well, you've got in order to win a European championship now, you have to have an MLS player or have an MLS connection, an FC Dallas connection, with your European champions of both the Champions League and the Cup.
Oh, yeah.
Sevilla and
Sevilla
and
playing here and Bayern haven't. Yeah.
And we'll have to keep an eye on Chris Richards and see where his trajectory goes with the Bayern first team. And my guy Chris Kappas, I hear, might be moving soon, so we'll see. I'm excited for all those young kids, and hopefully Reggie will soon add his name to the list of ex-academy guys playing their way in Europe. That would be exciting.
Yeah, it's bittersweet. You want to see him do well and play at the highest level, but you also want to be a little bit selfish and want to have him playing in front of you forever.
Well, thankfully we'll at least have Paxton and Jesus and Brandon and Edwin and Thomas, although maybe not Thomas. We'll see.
Wow, you just dumped on all of them.
Yeah, no, I'm excited they're all going to be here. Get to watch them. Tanner Tessman, I'm excited, man. I love watching these kids come through. It's going to be fantastic.
Definitely. That's one of the nice things. That is one of the nice things about FC Dallas is, those first couple of years of Orlando and New York City were just terrible. Terrible. There was no connection to the local area. There was no progression. It was just guys that were there filling a role and getting old. And
all right, well, Dan, I think we've about exhausted everything. Thanks for your help today getting this podcast. It was a little disjointed. You and I are not the usual hosts of this thing, but thank you anyway.
I mean, we try. We get there in the end, and hopefully we're getting good information out to people. That's what we're here for, right?
Yes, that is why we're here, and hopefully people enjoyed the podcast. This was episode 74, if I remember correctly. We are glad that you joined us, and if you enjoyed this podcast or enjoy any of our work, be sure and support us at patreon.com/thirddegree. We could use the support. We hope you enjoyed this podcast, and we'll see you again next week on Third Degree, the podcast.
Good luck, Reggie.